Hey folks, welcome to the Daily Evolver and another fun-filled adventure show starring the Shrink and the Pundit. I'm Jeff Salzman, welcome to the Daily Evolver and another fun-filled psychotherapist extraordinaire, Dr. Keith Witt, the Shrink. Hey, Dr. Keith.
Hey, Jeff. How are you
doing?
Well, I'm good. I'm
always
great. I'm always super stoked and happy to talk with you.
Yeah, likewise. The topic today is, in a way, it's a topic that I'm surprised we haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah.
We've done, I think, 25 plus of these Shrink and the Pundits. And we're just now getting to conflict, which is, of course, one of the major engines of evolution. It's just interpenetrated with everything we do in a way, and yet it causes so much suffering, and yet it's so irresistible and juicy. and I know you've been preparing some thinking on this because you're doing a talk at a conference, and I really love what you did. I mean, you've really thought it through evolutionarily, and you know how conflict manifests itself up the stages of development. Right up to second tier. And I just have to read a sentence that you wrote, because when I read stuff like this, I think, oh yeah, baby. So here it is. You talk about, moving into second tier conflict. Mm-hmm. And you talk about the markers of second tier conflict. And you say, second tier conflicts keep pumping compassion, love, and play into the fractal interface between order and chaos, until it transforms into warmth and intimacy, the gold standards of interpersonal repair. Yeah, baby.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah. So, I guess we'll just start maybe at the beginning, and just this whole idea of evolution being driven by conflict, that fractal barrier between order and chaos, and how it continues to manifest.
Yes, what you said, conflict is in everything. Yeah, that when the Big Bang happened, the laws of the universe came into existence, and one of them was chaos theory, complexity theory, which is that if there's a system of linked differentiated parts that are energized, arranged hierarchically, and don't get lost in rigidity or chaos, they have a natural tendency to self-organize to greater complexity. And that's, the human brain, that's you and me, we're a linked system of differentiated parts arranged hierarchically.
Yeah. Well, that's it's the old joke. How do you get the complete works of Shakespeare? Take a big mess of hydrogen and leave it alone for 13.8 billion years.
Right. And 15 minutes after the Big Bang, the plasma was turning itself into a more complex form, hydrogen and helium. I mean, it was just on and on like that. And so that the place where the novelty takes place, where that greater complexity arises, is a fractal interface between order and chaos. And if you get caught in rigidity in order, you don't go to greater complexity. If it blows away like a puff of smoke in chaos, you don't. But if you can stay at that fractal interface, eventually it self-organizes to greater complexity. And this basically has been the evolution of the universe, and then it hit life. And so that's conflict, that fractal interface. And so conflict is intertwined into every single thing that happens, every single thing that we do, for better or worse.
So I love, you and I were just talking a little bit before we started recording here, and you were talking about play and how conflict is just interpenetrated with play.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of, I think it's Richard Feynman, the physicist, who talked about, how subatomic particles behave. Mm-hmm. And there's no rhyme or reason. And he said the best thing he can come up with is that they're playful.
I like that.
I do too.
And I believe that. And we see it at play is one of the most complex instincts. And in humans, of course, because we take the instincts and turn them into art, human play is just incredible. But we see it at every level of evolution. And, if you see a couple of little polar bears or a couple of wolves or a couple of gazelles or whatever, when they're little and they're playing, there's an aura of there's conflict involved. You're pushing each other around. And they'll push each other often to a point where somebody's distressed. Then they push back, and then as they push back, greater complexity in the relationship is established. So this is a mammalian instinct that is involved with, and mammals, of course, have social learning.
Well, I'll give you a real quick example of that.
Sure.
My friend's French bulldog puppy that I often watch, and she's probably a year and a half old now. And she's a French bulldog. She loves to bite, and she loves to, and when she greets me, she's so excited. She wants to bite my face and my hands. And I've scolded her, and get down, back, Sasha, that kind of thing. And it doesn't really help until I read on Reddit, one of the dog training subreddits on Reddit, that the way to deal with that is to yelp, is to let her know that she hurt me. And by God, it has been miraculous in changing her behavior. When she bites me, I yelp, and she doesn't want to hurt me. She wants to play.
And she's evolutionarily programmed to back off at that particular sound. That's conflict resolving into more complexity. You see it in the primates. The primates have intricate social structures that they're driven to evolutionarily, but then what you have is differences between individuals and individual upbringing will determine how effective they are. For instance, rhesus monkeys have a very hierarchical matrilineal society, but the rhesus monkeys that have good mothers, they're way better at conflict resolution. The ones that bad mothers, way worse. They either dominate, they run, they're not very effective, and so on. So there's an awful lot of the instincts, and our instincts come from being a pair-bonded species that organized into tribes. And within those tribes, there was clearly dominance hierarchies, probably enforced, if you can look back at the more advanced primates, with dominance display like with gorillas and stuff. But after a certain point, consciousness began to take over. And it happened more slowly. When I look back at the fossil record, it punctuated equilibrium. Sometimes it happened slowly and sometimes it happened quickly. For instance, human beings used the same tools from 1 million years to 500,000 years ago. But then there was a catastrophe in Africa where we don't get any fossils because there's all kinds of volcanoes and stuff. But then 150,000 years later, all of a sudden, because that catastrophe created more chaos, the human beings had to create more complexity to deal with it. And so what do we have? We have evidence of trade, more sophisticated weapons and arrowheads and stuff.
Seems like a brutal way to do things.
Evolution is not kind.
Yeesh.
Evolution is wasteful and brutal. Here's my favorite new evolution thing. Because as we began to get into language and symbolic communication, and where we could imagine the past and the future, we began to have nature mysticism cosmologies. We see evidence of that, starting with the FOXP2 mutation 200,000 years ago, but continuing and especially accelerating 100,000 years ago. And there was an experiment that was done in Russia in 1950 by this Russian geneticist, and he was curious, how did things get domesticated? So he took these commercial foxes and he went up to the cubs starting at 1 month old, and he just picked the ones that were the least frightened of people and the most friendly, and he bred them and did that. In 10 generations, he had foxes, wild foxes, that were as friendly and lick your face as Irish setters. But not only that, their morphology changed. Their faces got flatter. The colors of their coats got more varied. They had more juvenile experience, more juvenile appearance, a younger appearance. Well, apparently 80,000 years ago, there was a proliferation of tribes in Africa. And there's some speculation that between 80,000 and 60,000 years ago, humans self-domesticated. That in those tribes, when they're against each other, the people that were more altruistic and had more of a capacity to create alliances gave an advantage to themselves and their tribes. And what happened to human? The fossil records show that our skulls are a little bit smaller, our faces are a little bit flatter. Certainly humans have a wide variety of colors and shapes. We self-domesticated, and what that did is it amplified our instincts to care, share, and be fair. Yeah, we have those instincts, but we also have the instincts to dominate. We have the instincts to submit and so on. And so, okay, fast forward through evolution. So how is conflict resolved? I mean, we can tell how it's resolved in play. You were just describing it. We can tell how it's resolved with children. We look at children 7 or 8 or 9. 8 out of 9 times when they have conflict, it resolves into somebody dominating or somebody running away. I mean, that's kind of the natural order of things. But you know, when you and I first met, I mentioned Julian Jaynes' book on the origin of consciousness.
Origin of consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind.
Yeah. His belief was that the right and left hemispheres of humans had developed somewhat independently, and the people heard voices, and they believed they were the voices of the gods, and that their shaman and their leaders had a clear channel into the voices of the gods, and that generated conflict resolution, not to mention social cohesion in societies up to around 2,000 years ago. When people's brains began to get stronger, you know, there was moving from pre-operational to concrete operational cognitively. Well, that then tends to suppress hearing voices. And that's when we begin to get, and writing happened. And that's when something that was really cool happened. The Dharma, remember Miles' thing is Dharma. Dharma is basically a large, an interpretation of Dharma. It is the law. Either general spiritual law like the Eightfold Path or specific laws. And 1800 BC, this guy Hammurabi, he ruled the Assyrian Empire, and he created what's called the Code of Hammurabi, and he chiseled it in granite so that we found it later on. And what's interesting about the Code of Hammurabi is, in a way, it was the first Dharma. You know, in this, he assigned rights to slaves and freemen and wealthy people. I mean, that was an evolutionary triumph. And when he did it in 2 voices. One was this complete power god, I am Hammurabi, I am the greatest, bow down, kiss my feet, and you're lucky to do it, guy. And then there was this more formal operational guy saying, with over 200 laws, you know, if you steal an oxen, then you have to give back 20 oxen, you know? Basically first order Dharma, concrete operational Dharma. Now, Julian Jaynes thought he was literally hearing voices that he was channeling, and he might have. And that was kind of the beginning of this interplay between Dharma as it's spoken, Dharma as it's written, and then the social structures. And now we can keep going forward into the diaspora in the Mediterranean in 1500 BC with their...
Yep. Well, what you're talking about reminds me of a book that I've been intending to get. I actually pulled this together here. It's from, I think it's the latest edition of The Atlantic, but it's a review of a book called The Goodness Paradox. The strange relationship between virtue and violence in human evolution. It's very much what you're talking about.
Exactly.
And it's by Richard Wrangham. And this is the guy who wrote Demonic Males. That was a pretty, influential book a few years ago. And he talks about the difference between the chimps and the bonobos.
Yes.
And how the bonobos basically figured out a way of organizing betas to deal with alphas.
Yeah.
And they had they had different life conditions. They had a more lush kind of a habitat and so forth. But it's interesting to see the differentiation between chimps and bonobos in terms of, conflict versus, the love and war, basically. The bonobos do love and the chimps do war. Chimps and bonobos diverged 2 million years ago. And probably the bonobos did not have
threats from
Right.
And so they self-domesticated.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they're saying here.
They're matrilineal. When two people have two bonobos have a conflict, they sit and they stroke each other's genitals until they work it out.
Oh, that is scandalous.
Well, I can think of worse ways to do
I suppose.
And chimps, on the other hand, are a real patriarchal power god, very aggressive and so on.
Right.
And so, go on.
I was just going to say that, one of the things he talks about, and this is very much evolutionarily, down the line, is that it's a matter of domesticating reactive aggression, is what he talks about. Mm-hmm. And that's, reactive aggression is what we want it to be right there when we need it. Yes. In the proverbial dark alley when somebody comes at us, we want to have reactive aggression, but we have all these layers of consciousness that we've laid on top of that, but it's still there.
Yes.
And that's what's so kind of interesting and confusing and, dangerous in a way.
And exciting.
Conflict
adds, a happy life involves the capacities to love, serve, create, and play. Well, all of those things involve conflict, involve dynamic tensions. And those dynamic tensions feed energy into those systems. And so that conflict is necessary for loving, creating, playing, and serving. Yeah. And I agree with him about reactive aggression. Certainly, my studies of martial arts was way more about regulating violence than it was about spontaneous violence. It was that a lot of the training was making a discernment and surrendering to the appropriate channel. We as humans have wildly different channels. But the thing about collaborative or nonviolent solutions, that's what Dharma has been all about from the very beginning.
Well, let me look at that, because you talk about that in these notes, that one of the things that human beings did, and I think you trace it back to Plato, is the dialectic. I hear the dialectic, and I know the dialectic, and blah, blah, blah. But I got it in a deeper way. Because basically what we sort of innovated with is the art of arguing. Something like that, right?
Yes. And it
brought great peace upon the land.
And also,
because we could do it with ideas and words instead of clubs and sticks.
And also, it's two people coming up with the creative advance and the novelty. It's two people coming up with it. It's an intensely humanistic activity. Before, wisdom had to come from the gods. Okay, in the golden age of Greece, it really was analogous to the human potential movement of the 60s in the United States.
Really?
Very similar. All the arts exploded. Dance, music, theater, philosophy, science. And Socrates said two human beings engaged in going back and forth, giving and receiving influence, creates wisdom. And he was talking about both second-order Dharma. Second-order Dharma is perennial wisdom. We don't do steal an ox, get 20 oxen back today. But we do the golden rule today, and we do the dialectic today, and we do raise the kundalini today, and we do the eightfold path is just as relevant today as it was during the axial period. There's certain kinds of Dharma that seems to be fundamental to the human experience. And then there's other lesser order Dharma that is all the lower right quadrant stuff that, we need to get along in any specific society.
Like laws and customs and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And almost all of that stuff is designed to take us a step away from spontaneous violence as a resolution of conflict. And eventually it led, in 1215, with the Magna Carta, it began to lead to human rights. That each person had rights. an amazingly novel concept. It's just such a beautiful, when people, there's a lot of people these days that give the Enlightenment a lot of trouble because, the Enlightenment was fueling a lot of colonialism and stuff. And that was true, but that colonialism basically was the residue of amber coming up through the Enlightenment. And, everybody knows that if you give red and amber, orange,
modern weaponry, railroads and telegraphs and guns, oh Lord,
bad things happen.
Yeah.
So a lot of bad things happen, but it really did lead into increasing nonviolent models of conflict resolution.
Yeah, the Magna Carta was a big part of that because that was the differentiation with civil law versus religious law, right?
The secularization of the law. And now it doesn't have to be as much, from God. Now it's from what works, what's fair. And, fairness is a big deal. Little kids are acutely aware of fairness. Now if we can go up the evolutionary ladder with a human child, it's primitive when they're young, but it still says, there was a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. This is a true story. So the mom gave the 6-year-old 2 cookies and gave the 4-year-old 1 cookie. Okay. And the 4-year-old was super pissed. That's not fair. So the mom said, okay, I'll take care of it. She took his cookie, broke it in half and says, now you have 2. And he said, okay, I'm fine. It was fair. Okay. Now that wouldn't have worked for him when he became formal operational, but that instinct for fairness is there. It's there in all of us. And the cool thing about the last 100 years is we began to bring the interiors into this. It's not just about the contract, what's fair under the law. The mediation movements, Anatole Rappaport was one of the pioneers of this, involved, and it was international mediation. It was everybody has to understand the other person's point before they start advocating. And we want to have a solution that's not just fair under the law, but that people feel good about.
Right. So when did this come online in, sort of a mass way, the mediation you're talking about?
This happened in the last 100 years.
Okay.
And I think it was driven.
Because we did have the golden rule where we want to take the other person's perspective.
I think that's always been there. And of course, that's what we love about the New Testament, the brotherhood of man. I'm looking at the Dharma, the development of the law, the development of Dharma.
Right.
In a way, it's seen it become more mainstream.
Yeah.
Like you and I were ecologically conscious in the 70s, but it's mainstream now.
Well, exactly. And actually, Greeks had rights if you were in the nobility.
Yeah.
But then we get this sort of more mass application of that with the Magna Carta. And, so that's what we're talking about here.
Right. The Greeks had slaves. Hammurabi gave slaves rights, but they were still slaves.
Yeah.
Okay, in 20th century, you can't be slaves. The mediation movements we're interested in interiors. The development of psychology and psychoanalysis and so on. My aunt and uncle, they're Baha'is, and they're both judges. And they were asked by the Pakistan government to go mediate settlements disputes between Pakistan and Afghanistan border. And they went and did that for a while. And it was very much about, we want people to go away feeling like it's fair. Okay? We want the interiors to be working, not just the exteriors under the law, which is where psychotherapy takes us.
Right.
And John Gottman, when he developed his blueprint for repair, he borrowed from Anatole Rappaport in his system because it works.
Yeah. Well, God knows it's better than the previous stage, which would be endless blood feuds.
Yes.
For generations. As, whoever was on top treated the other side unfairly.
And their children, and their children's children.
Domination, submission. And so now we get basically a win-win.
Uh-huh.
That's good, huh?
Yeah.
That's progress.
And in win-win, we can still have conflict.
Yep.
But the conflict is for excitement. Good sex. You need an edge there. Okay, there's conflict. Play. You need an edge there. There's conflict. All that. And so, but especially in conflict resolution.
Right.
Especially in intimacy. This is why I wanted to talk about second-tier intimacy around this.
Yeah.
Because
well, actually, before we do, let me just note a territory that a lot of us go through on the way. And this is sort of that green territory where, conflict, I just don't want any of it. I just can't handle any conflict. And there's still a big part of me in that territory. I do it, but do I like it? Do I choose it? Do I, bring it online in a conscious way? Not necessarily. It's an edge for me.
Yeah. Well, it's scary. Conflict is always scary. Not just interpersonal conflict, but intrapersonal conflict, which is when we're dealing with ourselves, where are the problems? The problems are when we have interior conflict. In fact, Freud's definition of neurosis was an internalized conflict.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, what happens after the sort of green pacification, if you will, is then at Integral we start to see where conflict is juicy and good, and we bring it back online in a conscious way, and that's what we're talking about here.
That's exactly what we're talking about. And this is where the dialectic isn't enough. You can practice the dialectic from every value meme, but every value meme has embedded blind spots where the dialectic's going to break down. Okay? You tell a red power god, you shouldn't dominate just because you can. He'll go, what's your point? You tell, say, a fundamentalist, an eye for an eye is not an effective way of solving problems. Go, yeah, it's in the Bible. It is an effective way.
Yeah.
Or, one of my favorite orange examples is Mitt Romney going, look, I'm paying 14% taxes. I'm paying what the law says. And he genuinely was bemused. What's your problem? That was such an orange response to that. It was an embedded blind spot. And then you were talking about the embedded blind spots in green, around hierarchy, around the value of conflict, around the expression of the warrior. We don't want to go there. I mean, I'm in the 70s. I remember saying to one group that psychotherapy was a form of combat without killing. There were a couple of just horrified green reactions to that.
I know. Well, green does plenty of conflict. It just doesn't like it, yeah, exactly.
And then it gets more challenging, but it gets juicier as we get better at this. Why is that? Well, we want to bring just enough conflict into work, play, service, and love so that we're optimizing them, but not enough so that we get rigid or we get lost in chaos. But if we don't do enough, we tend to get rigid. And going back to complexity theory, remember the danger is where we don't go to greater complexity is when we get caught in rigidity or when we escalate into chaos. So you look at human relationships. Human relationships do really fine until one of us is threatened, okay? Now they do fine if we can play, but if one of us gets threatened, the conflict will arise. Now resolving conflict isn't enough for a great relationship. You also have to play. Couples that don't up-level fun times divorce after an average of 16 years.
Up-level fun times. What's that? That's cool. I like it, but what is it?
Well, you're a couple and you need to put some energy into having fun. Sex, play, laughter. The guy who studied this the most, John Gottman, I just love that guy. So he has a few answers when people ask him, seminal questions like, who should I choose? And he said, choose someone you laugh easily with. Okay, because now you're taking care of that and protect that play. Mm-hmm. Whatever you like to do, go to the opera, go to the movies, hang out and watch the sunset. If it's a shared activity where we're feeling some sense of shared pleasure, we're up-leveling the positives.
Yeah. And that laughter itself somehow, penetrates the ego boundaries. It's a liberating force, literally. There's energy that's allowed into the system when we laugh.
Oh, yeah. When they spend a long time to bed meditators, when they went into their meditation thing, everything lit up in their brain. That doesn't happen to anybody else unless they're laughing. And then the same thing.
Really?
Happens. Yeah. When you're
Interesting.
loud in laughter, your brain is having the same EEG signature as a longtime meditator when he's in unity.
Interesting. That explains something that I always loved, and I'm not sure I totally understood from Chogyam Trungpa. He would say, he was a Tibetan lineage with all these lamas and tulkus and rinpoches and whatever. And he would say that you can always tell the ones who have the highest level of achievement or attainment because they're playful.
Yes.
Isn't that something?
Yes.
If that's the marker of the high attainment, then I'll take it.
Boy, Trungpa. There was a lot of stuff that came from that guy. A lot of really good stuff. And it's still enduring, his stuff.
For sure. He preceded the Me Too movement, fortunately for him. But, his teachings are largely impeccable.
Well, and see, that's a really good example of not resolving your interior conflicts.
Yeah. Okay? He also drank himself to death at age 48.
Which is another example of not resolving your interior conflicts. It's the lines and levels have profound impact. And if I allow myself to say, I'm high enough on that level, that's fine, or I can violate my values in that level, eventually I'm going to pay a price for that, whatever that is. It doesn't mean I have to live a perfect life, but it does mean that if on some level there's an edge between Keith's values and Keith's behavior and so on, that edge I need to keep that edge growing. That's a fractal boundary.
Right.
I don't want it to get lost in chaos. I don't want to dissociate and have it get lost in rigidity. I want to keep my attention into it until it gets to a point where it feels virtuous, and now it's okay for now.
Well, you're making me think about relationship in general, and how relationships can get stale. Mm-hmm. With friends, with family, whatever. And I'm loving this fractal boundary, this chaos and rigidity. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to go on either, we don't get lost in either side of those. We want that fertile middle, which is to be maintained in relationship by the continuous telling of the truth.
Yes.
With courage, with love, with
compassion,
and with play. Right? When I think of some of my relationships that have gotten stale, I could, I've been around the block a few times. I could see that sometimes they just go away and they're over. Mm-hmm. But if there is something that causes a conflict, often that'll get us through to a new level. And unfortunately, I've done it unconsciously too many times, but I'm learning.
If you can keep the attention on the dialectic at that point, so there's up-leveling play, which is necessary. Now there's conflict. Okay, conflict is lost in rigidity as we go back into our positions and don't change them. Conflict that's lost in chaos as we accelerate into. Now, both of those things separate. And a good example of getting lost in rigidity is a lot of couples get sexually stale with each other. Now, I think that there's reasons for that from an evolutionary standpoint on account of we pass out of romantic infatuation. But from a structural standpoint of relationship, no two lovers are perfectly matched. So you're always going to have some kind of conflict. When you have that conflict, at least in this culture where we're taught to dissociate away from sex and not talk about it, if people don't have a resolution, they'll dissociate away from it and get into a rigid position, which takes juice out of that fractal interface. It's too scary to be there. And so they don't accelerate into chaos, but they begin to lose connection because you disconnect from rigidity just as you can disconnect from chaos. If you can stay at the fractal interface with love and with compassion and with play, mm-hmm. Eventually that fractal interface transforms into greater complexity. And you've added some juice to your sexual relationship.
Yeah.
So you can do that throughout a lifetime.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you put it in your notes here. You say that second-tier conflict resolution often doesn't even look like conflict. Uh-huh. Right?
Right.
Because so if you're doing this consciously with another person who's doing this consciously, then it's fun, right?
Yeah, one interesting statistic around happy couples. Happy couple, this is misunderstood. People used to think you have to say 5 positives to every 1 negative in a relation. That's a misreading of the data. Happy couples have positive affect 5 times more than negative affect in an argument. Now, what does that mean? That means that on an interior level, each one of them is regulating themselves away from rigidity and chaos into loving this person in the present moment and trying to put in positives, love, play, interest, that kind of stuff. They're both doing that simultaneously. That requires an enormous amount of self-regulation, not just consciously, but unconsciously. Development is marked by the growth of our unconscious way more than the growth of our conscious. And as our unconscious grows, it regulates for us. So when you get into a stable place of this kind of conflict resolution in the second tier, your unconscious, even when you're mad and your instinct says, I want to attack this person or get away from them, your unconscious is saying, no, what I want to do is get back to love with this person. Really, once people are mad at each other, they don't really want to get back to love. I want to attack you. I want to do this other stuff. But if my unconscious regulates that, then my conscious can remember it and go, okay, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to be good vibes. And remember, you're a good person. I'm a good person. I'm going to resist telling you my negative story about you or explaining to you how fucked up your position.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I stopped believing my negative story about them. In a way, this is where integral theory has really helped me so much.
Me too.
Even just to think of typology and the Enneagram or whatever, that I now see Chuck, my guy, as a 6, Enneagram 6. I'm an Enneagram 5. We're going to be natural enemies in the wild in certain ways. And I could be irritated by those 6 qualities that, are irritating. He could be irritated by mine. But I actually see now through integral and all the ways that we do cosmic addresses in terms of people's stages and lines of development and states and all of that stuff, we just get curious about each other rather than critical. That's just a flip.
You see how that's a profoundly evolutionary position?
Yes.
How it makes that the reason that we can be forgiving of each other's, irritations with that understanding is because we both know, even though we have these inherent capacities for conflict, we're both continuing to grow.
Yes.
An evolutionary perspective says, we might have a difficulty dealing with each other as different types of people. Becky's a 9, I'm a 6. We have that stuff. But there's a sense of in the areas we have trouble, we're gradually getting better.
Yeah.
That sense of we're evolving, we're gradually getting better, gives us the room to be accepting, to have radical acceptance for what is.
Hallelujah.
And one of the worst things you can say to your partner in a conflict is to say, that's the way I am, get used to it. In other words, I'm not going to change at all. One of the best things you can say is, I realize this part of me irritates you and I'm working on it, but it's kind of hard to change my, my fear stuff because I'm a fear type. I progress slowly. I'm 6, 5, 6, and 7. They're fear type.
I get it. Yeah. No, it's really wonderful. And to the degree that, just to go back to Chuck and me, to the degree that we can bring all of that into the open, and be playful with it, and be playful with his little contractions and my, withdrawals and, all of the things that make us who we are. It becomes fun, and we just sort of know that it's an area of our mutual growth.
And it's still conflict.
It's still irritating.
Going back to what you said earlier, I've seen you guys do this. And I know that it's a conflict, but somebody else wouldn't see it that way because you're self-regulating to stay in that place. And you're with each other, you're maintaining the dialectic. In the second tier, we still have primitive intrusions and blind spots, that are blind spots in the first tier. But we have the capacity to observe them in the second tier. So I had the capacity to go, whoa, I had a wave of rage when you just said that. Okay, saying I had a wave of rage can be interesting to my partner. Speaking from a wave of rage at my partner could be terrifying.
No.
Okay? So you're doing this incredibly sophisticated self-regulation, going back and forth in the dialectic, and then bam, something is more complex emerges. And we know it's more complex. Why? It feels better.
It does. It's more funner.
There's more compassion, there's deeper consciousness, which is the marker of development of consciousness, more compassion, deeper consciousness. And that's conflict in the second tier. It's, I spend, I do therapy pretty much nonstop Monday through Thursday, right? And about a third of it is couples. And they come in, and more often than not, we have to deal with conflicts on varying levels, depending upon all, their ACWL address and, their trauma, all the things that. But always when that's happening, there's a part of me that's envisioning them in a second tier conflict resolution process. It's a map that I guide them towards. I mean, maybe the only step that we can take is when he starts saying mean things, you have to interrupt him when he's starting the second one and tell him, I only can process one, angry thing at a time. Now, if she can do that, and if he can allow himself to be interrupted, they've just taken a step in the right direction.
Big one.
Yeah, but basically what we're doing is we're kind of at amber at that point. Okay, I'm trying to develop a tradition in their relationship to make emotional violence as unacceptable as physical violence is for most couples. Now, the only way to do that is to train your unconscious to do it. Okay? So you just go through those different places. And, it's okay with me wherever anybody is, as long as they're willing to receive influence and move forward. I know where they're going. Now, in the second tier, it's just a lot easier and more fun. There's more laughter, and there's more enjoyment, and there's less risk. Mm-hmm. There's less danger.
Well, I'll tell you, I fortunately learned most of this decades ago. But I came from an environment where saying mean things was okay.
Yeah, me too.
And it took me a long time to realize that it's not.
No, it's not.
And it doesn't mean that I'm living under a wet blanket and all of the juice is gone. I thought it meant that, but you
don't have to be mean to set a boundary. I had a pretty happy childhood. I got to say, until I was around 12 or 13, when everything went to hell. Yeah. But before that, it was a happy childhood. But when people ask me, what was it like? I go, well, I was kind of raised by wolves. In that, in my family, if you push too far, someone would yelp at you. Okay, so that's kind of how it went.
Yeah. Now,
it didn't work for me at 12 or 13. I just happened to be someone who is completely obsessed and fascinated with interiors. Okay, you can't take somebody like that and put them into a culture that doesn't have any provision for interiors without having consequences.
Right.
So,
right.
Consequence with me is, I kind of bubbled my hostile, negative, destructive shadow interiors over everybody until somebody gave me some way of dealing with interiors, which happens with a lot of teenagers.
Yeah, it's functional in its own way. It's just painful, and there's a better way to do it.
Well, and it's dangerous.
Yeah.
People
get really hurt.
Here, that's the suicide rate going up for teenagers. That's that's 25% of murders in this country being love triangles. It's dangerous to not have an understanding of those forces and an evolutionary perspective of, I want to evolve to the point where I'm naturally attracted, even in a state of duress, to the nonviolent solution that produces more compassion or more love. Well, we've talked about the difference between dominator hierarchies and growth hierarchies, and we've talked about the difference between handling and relating. In the second tier, basically, you do an awful lot of relating, and if you're handling with the full understanding by the other person that they're allowing themselves to be handled by you. Thank you very much. Which is way different than handling somebody.
It can be great. I love being handled by somebody who knows how to do it. Bring it on.
Yeah, thank you. Soothe me.
Yes.
Exactly. Listen to me. You know, I want to rave. I want to rave about insurance companies for 2 minutes. Okay, I can listen to you rave about insurance companies or pharmaceutical companies. Okay, now I've listened to you rave enough, Keith.
Right. Exactly. But that what a great 2 minutes that can be.
Oh, that's why I did Therapists in the Wild. I wanted to be able to rant about things every once in a while.
Yeah, totally. That's one of the things I love about Integral is that, you know, we transcend these earlier stages, but we include them. We just civilize them. They're still there, and they get to be there, and we get to bring them out and play with them. And as long as we're doing it with somebody who knows how to play back, it's really great. But we're not contracted around any of it anymore.
And accepting all of them.
Yeah, and accepting all of them. And
I radically accept the fact that you have to. Now, I believe that times you have to set firm boundaries. I don't think that you have to be disrespectful.
Right.
But I believe you have to set firm boundaries sometimes.
Well, I don't know. I always love this line by Scott Peck, you know, who wrote Road Less Traveled. He said that a gentleman is someone who never offends another person unintentionally.
There you go.
So,
I got that.
Yeah, I do too. I like that.
And the same for physical constraint.
Yeah.
You know, that's martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you have to do violence, you do it, and you do it in the way you're supposed to do it, only when you have no other alternative. Okay.
And make it a nice, clean cut when you take their head off.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it really takes me back to Miyamoto Musashi, Book of Five Rings. You know, one of the things that he said, don't slash, cut.
Really? I like that.
Think always of the cutting. He said, you don't want to be a slasher. And I thought, well, you know, I like that applied to psychotherapy. You know, don't think about, you know, messing around. Think about going right to the heart of what
right now. A clean cut can be such a great kindness.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And you do it as compassionately as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, again, in the second tier, if that's delivered to me and I feel it and I feel the defensive intensity arise, the instinct is, whoa, where is this extra energy coming from? Now, at that particular point, I'm at a fractal boundary. I'm not lost in chaos where that energy is pushing me because it's threatening stuff. I don't get lost in rigidity as you're all screwed up and I'm not going to let go of that. I go, whoa, where is that upsurge coming from? And if you're with me on that, we stay at that fractal boundary and greater complexity is going to come out of that. Insight's going to come out of that. Development's going to come out. More love and more play is going to come out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's that line again. Where is that? I got to find that again. It transforms into warmth and intimacy, the gold standards of interpersonal repair.
Yeah, if you're not feeling warm towards your partner, you haven't repaired yet.
Yeah.
You know, and then you know if you're feeling warm, and they know if they're feeling warm. If we're not feeling warm, well, now we got to go feel warm.
Right.
You know, it's funny when I sometimes working with couples, you know, they'll get a little stuck, and I'll say, look at each other and just be warm. And you know, when I ask them to do it, they'll look at each other, they'll start laughing, and they'll be warm. And I'll say, so I can ask you to do it, and you can do it in the middle of this argument. So I want you guys to do that.
Aww.
I want both of you to be responsible for saying, well, wait a minute. You know, let's look and remember who we are and be warm right now.
Yeah.
Let's add, you know, more positive affect to that fractal interface until greater complexity arises out of it. Now, in the Dharma has progressed along with all this other stuff. And now we have, you know, I've written 8 books about this stuff. Right now, there's a renaissance in human development, psychotherapy, relationships, and all that other stuff, because people are feeling their own versions of this particular wisdom, and they really want to share it with other people. And so the Dharma around this has expanded enormously. And the thing that happens in the second tier is it doesn't just stop with you and me, because we understand that you and I are part of a vast array of interlocking contexts that we're responsible for.
Right. Well, and that gets me to the bigger context. And, you know, what we've been mainly talking about is interpersonal conflict. Yeah. And I guess that's all the way up. But how about, you know, what are we going to do with these Trump people?
Oh, man.
How about the culture war? You know, that's an area of conflict that a lot of people listening to this are really suffering with.
I agree. And you know, I have, as you know, my biases about this are, is with deeper consciousness comes more responsibility. I look to have engagement with people, say Trump supporters, when I have an opportunity, but I don't do a dialectic with them. You know, they're just going to get irritated if I throw facts at them. You know, they're in an amber altitude. But what I want them to do is to feel understood and supported by someone who disagrees with them. Why? I'm basically speaking to their unconscious. I want their unconscious to go, well, these other people disagree, but you know, Keith was understanding and supportive, even though he disagreed with me. And he didn't burden me with all those nasty facts that make me feel so pissed off and contemptuous of him. Science has a liberal bias. Okay, that's fine. But I want the conversations to continue. Now, the other part about this is my own dream would be that all the babies and all the mothers and all the infants and all the pregnant women and all the young couples, and particularly the disadvantaged ones, would get a lot of attention and a lot of support through pregnancy into the first, into development, into the school system, where we were teaching people how to mediate problems, which happens in a lot of elementary schools, how to have empathy. There's empathy programs in a lot of elementary schools. All these things tend to produce kids that are more likely to learn critical thinking at 12 and 13, have growth mindsets, which is an evolutionary mindset. And eventually, the Trump supporters' children at some point are going to want what's more beautiful, good, and true. And, you know, you cannot make a case for Trump's positions or the things that he's done being more beautiful, good, and true. They're certainly more satisfying to an eye for an eye consciousness, you know, because he's smiting people they don't like. But it's not beautiful, good, and true.
Yep.
And so,
yeah. Well, yeah. You know, what really helps me with this is it's a little bit like I was talking about with one of the things that Integral brings us is these cosmic addresses and types and development stages and so forth. And I realize that the world is full of people at all kinds of cosmic addresses. Uh-huh. And they see the world differently. They actually get different inputs. They value different things. They process information differently. And they have a piece of the truth that I, at my cosmic address, am actually missing. Yeah. And that is a great practice for me, to see what is the piece of the truth that these people have that, you know, my enemies of all stripes, I have many of them, but
I don't think you have many enemies.
Well, you know, but it really does make having an enemy a lot more interesting and a lot more fruitful if you realize, what do they have to teach me, actually? I mean, I know what I have to teach them. And I've been, God knows, I've been on when I think of my friends who disagree with me, I've been on the Improve Them project for a long time. But what do they have to teach me is a lot harder.
And when are they right?
Yeah, and when are they right? What are they seeing that I'm not?
Yeah. When is their position exactly when I was studying karate one time, I was, talking about your hyper-masculine cultures, Shotokan karate. So there was this guy who was just the nastiest guy in the school. His name was Jeff. And when I got my black belt, he took me out on the floor and just worked me over to let me know I wasn't hot shit. You know?
Right after you get your black belt, you're not hot shit?
Oh. No, he really let me know. Anyway, he and his brown belt were at Huntington Beach drinking beer one day, and they were jumped by 4 or 5 guys. You know, I don't know how they did it, but they all jumped. So I heard Jeff tell the story, and I heard the brown belt tell the story. Now, when the brown belt told the story, he was terrified. He said, God, this guy was all over me. He was hitting me. I was trying to get my way out of it. You know, finally did, and they started running away. Jeff told the story, and he was just happy as hell. He said, yeah, these 5 or 6 guys, I forget how many, they jumped us. So first of all, I did this and this with this guy, and then I did this and this with this guy. Then I pulled the other guy off and did this and this, and then all of a sudden they were running away. He sounded vaguely regretful that they were running away. I kind of more identify with the brown belt because I don't like violence. I don't like the idea of having to hurt another person. Jeff had loved hurting other people. But I thought in that situation, that worldview is exactly the right worldview to have.
Yeah.
Not only that, he was not traumatized by that event. Brown belt might have been traumatized. He was really scared, fear for his life. Jeff was completely enlivened by that. He was just, oh boy.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
Yeah, these guys are giving me an opportunity.
Well, I was just thinking, I wonder what belt it is when you like put your hands over your head and shriek. That's what I'd do.
I think it's your 15th level belt.
I don't know.
It might just be exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah, well, it's the only thing I got, so it's all I got. All right. Well, I think we've sorted this out. Anything we have yet to say? Put on the table?
Only I'm looking forward to what everybody else is going to be saying about Dharma and the evolution of consciousness at Miles' thing.
Yeah, right.
His summit. I'm excited about it on the 22nd.
And what's the name of it again? It's
called Dharma and the Evolution of Conflict.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm looking forward to speaking, but also I'm looking forward to hearing whatever Ken's going to talk. Ken always comes up with something mind blowing.
Oh yeah.
So oh boy, looks something on the horizon that sounds like an awful lot of fun. So there's that.
Yes, there's always that. Well, what fun, Keith. And like I said, it took us, I don't know, I think I counted up 28 shrinks from the pundits, and finally we get the conflict.
You finally get a conflict. How amazing is that?
Yeah. But it really, the turn where we turn towards conflict and start using it, and it's our magic carpet.
Yeah.
That second tier insight is really, really powerful. And, I'm working on it. What can I tell you?
Me too.
All right, everybody. Let's all keep working on it. And we'll see you next time in the Daily Evolver. Thank you, Dr. Keith Witt. Where can people go to find out more about you?
People can go onto my website, drkeithwitt.com. I got a new thing on my website. But if you sign up for my website, every week you'll get a little video and a little blog and some resources about a topic that's exciting to me.
Great.
I figured, I was challenged. I only wanted to do 14 of them. And so, there's an awful lot of them. So they were the 14 things that seem most central and relevant and exciting to me now. And so if you sign up on my website, it's free, but you sign up on my website, you'll get that. You'll get one of those a week for the next 14 weeks.
Great. Through your email.
Yeah.
Fabulous. All right, man. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
And we will see you next time on The Shrink and the Pundit. You can find all my stuff at dailyevolver.com. Join Integral Life. It's well worth it. And I guess that's it for today. Thanks, folks.
Much love to everybody.